Hi, everyone. Thank you, Aisha, for that really nice introduction. And thank you all for joining this session. It's really encouraging to see so many of you here. And I think that gym sort of survey that we did, I think is quite related to our presentation today. I'll let Bhavna say hello, and then I think we can start. We'll get started on our presentation.
Thank you, Annu. Hi, everyone. I'm glad a lot of people turned out and really hope we can give you something that you can implement in your life from today onwards.
Yeah, and with that, we'll get started. We're excited to start this off, but I think we have quite a lot to get through, so we'll get started on that. And feel free to post any questions that you have as I go through the presentation in the chat. So as Aisha mentioned, Bhavna and I work with a mental well-being company called Tatsam, and burnout is one of those things that I think we get really often. We often find working professionals face this. But yeah, Bhavna, if you want to just move forward, we'll So the focus of the presentation today is going to be just giving you an idea of what burnout is, how you can recognize it in yourself, why it tends to happen. So looking at some of the risk factors, we'll go into the 5 stages of burnout, because burnout is a progressive situation. It's one of those things that a lot of us don't realize is happening. And usually when we do realize, we're already kind of well into it. And I think the main focus is giving you guys all some strategies on how you can prevent burnout in yourselves, or even reduce it if it started for you already. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can do that ourselves and what some of the mental health support services are that you might want to take advantage of. And we're really excited to have put together a toolkit for you guys as well, which you'll get at the end of this session. So I think we can move forward. Okay, so I got this quote, I think, from the WHO, and they actually changed this quote in 2019. And so you can see here that burnout involves your emotional health, your mental health, and is characterized by physical exhaustion. So it's unique in the way that it's one of those issues where it isn't actually a mental illness or a mental health condition, but it involves all of our bodies, our emotions, our mind, our physical health. And it is triggered by work life, but it can be triggered by other things such as parenting, relationships, etc. Okay, so we wanted to do a little bit of a poll just to get you started on thinking about burnout. Aisha, it would be helpful if you could maybe just. So we want to know if any of you guys have had a sense of dread about work. Can everyone see these responses, Aisha, or do we need to share them?
We'll have to share them post-session.
Okay, great. So we'll maybe just give it 2 minutes and then we can share them.
Sure.
Okay, interesting. So let's maybe share these, Aisha, if that's okay. Do we have to stop share the presentation?
No, everybody can see that.
Okay, perfect. So really interesting, guys. I actually thought that there would be more people who said they're so exhausted that they can't get out of bed. But the reason we ask these questions is because these questions although obviously you can feel like this if you don't have burnout, but they kind of emphasize two of the key aspects of burnout, which is physical exhaustion and a sense of anxiety, dread, or mental detachment from work. And so we can see that quite a lot of you have this feeling of dread about work. And I think, you know, the majority of you also have this exhaustion. As I said, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have burnout, but it's about illustrating some of the symptoms that we might take for granted and not realize until it's progressed to a point that is kind of difficult to overcome. So the key aspect of burnout, which I think I've covered already, is that it involves your physical health, your emotional health, your psychological health, and it has some pretty unfortunate implications. It definitely affects your work. It's going to affect, in most instances, most of your life, including your relationships, how often you go to the gym, all of the things that sort of keep you healthy and kind of excited about life. Tend to really be impacted by burnout. So these are just some of the symptoms that you might face in each of the areas. And I don't want to go through every single one. So yeah, we'll move forward. Sorry, can we just move back for 1 sec, Bhavna? Sorry. Yeah, so what I want to emphasize here is that physical exhaustion, impaired immune system, issues with sleep and chronic pain are usually the first kinds of symptoms that people will notice. And you'll probably notice this before some of the psychological symptoms like anxiety, brain fog, feeling a little bit distanced from your job, and before some of the emotional symptoms as well. And when we talk about chronic pain, it's things like, you know, your neck pain, backaches, you know, random headaches, and just feeling a little bit run down. Sorry, Bhavna, you can move forward. Okay, so there are a lot of risk factors for burnout. And one of the core, I would say, objectives of our session today is to really emphasize that, as with all physical issues as well as mental health issues, there are a lot of risk factors, but your experience will be very individual. And actually, in our toolkit that we'll be sharing with you, we are going to help you understand how some of these internal and external factors might contribute to burnout. I think I'll just run through it very, very quickly, but there are internal factors such as your personality type, whether you're one of those really driven, ambitious people that is very focused on your career. Not that that's by any means a negative thing, but if you're a real perfectionist, you're very kind of assertive, your job is really important to you, you can kind of be more at risk of this because you will, I would say, prioritize your work over your physical well-being and your mental well-being. The external factors are a little bit more, I would say, controllable in terms of the type of job that you choose, or even the kind of job environment that you work in. So as I'm sure we're all aware, human-computer interaction, so just being on digital devices all of the time, can you know, eventually kind of be sort of contribute to burnout. And if you're on the computer all the time, it increases your risk, as does kind of having less involvement with people. And I think there are certain types of professions which are also more prone to burnout. So for example, if you're working a night shift job, or even if you're working on a time zone, like a US time zone or a UK time zone, where your circadian rhythm is getting a little disrupted, that can increase your risk. And I think one of the things that people aren't as aware of, because a lot of people kind of equate work to burnout, but actually, if you are in a job where you're not feeling challenged, or you're not making that promotion, or you just are feeling like you're that you have other ambitions and you're not able to kind of get intellectually stimulated, that can actually contribute to burnout as well. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of things on this list, but we will be giving you some resources to help you understand how burnout could be affecting you. Bhavna, do you want to move forward? Okay, so we have another poll, and we just wanted to sort of ask you whether you think these are myths or facts, and maybe you can give us your view on this. Okay, I think we'll have to end it now, just because in the interest of time. Okay, so burnout is a mental health problem, and the second one is everyone who works a stressful job will get burnout. So we can move to the next slide, but what I would say is that one of the myths that we want to bust is that burnout is a mental health problem. Burnout does affect your mental health and can contribute to your mental well-being going down, and actually can even contribute to mental illness. But it is something which actually starts as a physical issue. It can cause a lot of physical health problems that we don't really want, including reducing our immune system and making us sort of more prone to issues like hypertension and diabetes, just because burnout is something which is very related to stress. And there are 5 stages of it. So coming to the second point, and I know that we've got the 5 stages kind of defined here, but coming to the second point, no, everyone that works a stressful job will not necessarily get burnout. And the reason is because we all have different ways in which we respond to stress. And just like with anything else, stress causes lots of different chemical and neurological changes in our body. And a lot of you guys might be familiar with things like cortisol, which are released when you are stressed. Stress isn't inherently a bad thing. It can actually be a good thing. And we actually developed stress because of like evolutionary reasons. But at times that cortisol level can get a little bit out of control. And that is when we kind of start to see other chemical changes, which can make us a little bit more run down. So it's when we don't respond well to stress that we start getting issues with burnout. But there are some people who are a little bit more resilient than others. There are external factors such as post-COVID. We saw something like a 40% increase globally of burnout issues. And it is because of some of the risk factors that I mentioned in the previous slide, which was we were isolated from other people. There was a lot of uncertainty and kind of external stress. We had people that were worried about finances. So all of those things reduces your ability to cope with stress because there's too many things coming at you at once. And that caused a global increase of about 40% in burnout. Okay, so going to these 5 stages, the first stage probably seems like it wouldn't be a stage of burnout, but actually all of us start in this very happy phase, maybe even when we first started working, where we were really, really excited about our jobs, or we're in a job that we're really, into, we want to do really well in it, and we're really driven, we're really ambitious, and we work ourselves really hard to meet those goals and to achieve those things that we want to do. All of those things are positive, but this is actually the first stage because oftentimes, sorry, did you have a question? Ooh, someone has a question. Will the recording be shared? I think Aisha can answer that. But just going back to this, the reason that this stage is the first stage is because this is the point where we start to neglect other aspects of our life. And specifically, we might start to neglect things like sleep and eating regularly and exercising and all of the things, even de-stressing activities that help us cope and respond better to stress. We then move to sort of an overload where that stress starts to increase. As I mentioned before, stress causes a lot of biological changes, and specifically with your adrenal glands. So when you're in that first honeymoon stage, your adrenal glands are kind of working overtime. This happens more if, for example, you're in a job where you're working odd hours, or when you're working really late. And because there's that adrenaline in your body, you don't feel it as much, but actually your body is starting to get run down. So we move to this overload phase. And this is where you might start to find that you are getting sick a little bit more often. You're starting to not have as much energy during the day. You might find that you're sleeping more than usual, sleeping less than usual, not finding it very easy to get to sleep. This is also a time where you might find appetite changes. That might be emotional eating. It might be just not eating very healthily. A lot of people get gastrointestinal issues. So I think one of the things to really remember here is that there are a lot of physical issues associated with burnout, and it isn't just a mental health condition. However, there are psychological effects, and they include the dread that we talked about right at the beginning. So worrying, anxiety about work deadlines, or even just about finances and things like that, everything that's going on in your life. You may find that you're not able to focus as well. You might find that you're quite irritated and angry, and this can have an impact on your relationships. And you may start to feel really overwhelmed, and that hopelessness of like, oh, I just can't believe I've got to start another day, you know, another week at work, or all of those feelings will start coming in. As I mentioned earlier, burnout is progressive, and we start moving into disengagement. I would say that the disengagement stage is really when you start to get to the point where you start to become a bit mentally distanced, and you're just like, I just don't care anymore. And you may even find that your absenteeism, presenteeism at work increases. You might find that you're just getting so overwhelmed that you can't actually be bothered to do anything. So there's like an apathetic reaction that you might have. This is also a time where you might actually be diagnosed with physical health issues. And commonly we see things like back injuries, migraine, that kind of physical health issue, and even things like IBS. And this basically starts to worsen until we kind of reach a failure point, which hopefully no one will reach from after this workshop. But it is basically mental and physical breakdown. And it's the time when people just need like 3 months off work because they've just become so overwhelmed. Okay, I think most of us are in kind of, I would say, stages 1 to 3. If you are kind of entering a stage 4 point, and we have got a little tool for you to kind of check this, then that might be a time where you can do some self-care stuff, but essentially it may require more support from like a mental health professional. Okay, we can move forward and just quickly talk through why would you worry about this. Well, I think I've mentioned it already. This is something which is progressive, and we call it kind of a ripple effect. Yes, it can start at work, but it can start because of other things. And other things could be, for example, a bereavement. So if you lose someone really close to you, it can be because you have children, for example, and you're very worried about them. Or, for example, during COVID, a lot of parents were just really concerned because their children couldn't go into school. It could be because of things like divorce, any kind of salient, high, you know, either something that's giving you a lot of psychological stress, or something which is occupational. So because of your job, you're putting a lot of hours into work, and it's starting to sort of run you down, essentially. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this, there are certain professions which are more prone to burnout. So people that work in healthcare, like doctors, nurses, where they have potentially a lot of high stress in their job from the perspective of needing to be on their feet all the time and being responsible for other people. People in hospitality often suffer from burnout just because they have to work often night shift for several weeks in a row. Again, they have quite a physically taxing job, and the same with people who work in aviation and so on. But that doesn't mean that if you're in an office job, you can't suffer from burnout. It is something which anyone can get at any point in their life. But it tends to come in towards, after you've been working for like 3 to 4 years. You don't tend to get it like right at the beginning of your career. Sorry, Bhavna, go ahead. Okay, so in terms of prevention, we just have this little table here, and I just want to say that we are at this pre-contemplation stage where you've developed an awareness of what burnout is. There are essentially kind of 6 stages to this model, and you can actually enter it at any point. And in terms of stress response, most of us don't really appreciate or acknowledge how much of a negative effect stress can have on our bodies and on our brain. But actually, stress is potentially quite damaging to our brain. So one of the things that's really important when you're in that kind of honeymoon stage, when you're developing this awareness, is about changing your mindset. Now, we do come from a culture where working really hard is something that all of us are kind of expected to do. And definitely in our work environments and our work cultures, that used to be the name of the game, that you just had to give 150% all the time. I think post-COVID and just in general, organizations have also understood that burnout is not something you want in your employees. And so there are definitely some mindsets that you need to kind of commit to sort of review, if not change, because often we tell ourselves these things in that honeymoon stage, or as we're approaching the second stage of burnout, which is where the stress starts to become more excessive. And you do need to kind of realize that if you're doing this and you are starting to feel a bit run down, it's important to start taking steps to sort of counteract that stress that you're facing day to day. Because all of the people that kind of reach that horrible stage at the end where they had a proper mental and physical breakdown, they told themselves those lies. So the next stage is when you're kind of, you know that there's a problem, and you're kind of contemplating action, and you're kind of preparing for action. So we've given you some tips here, and I think a lot of them will be things that you need to do, but aren't very easy when you're working in a high stress environment. So we all want to go to the gym, as we discovered at the beginning of this presentation, but a lot of us just don't have the energy, feel like we don't have the time, just can't really be bothered at the end of the day. And what you want to probably try and do is start things small and not have, I'm going to go to the gym 5 times a week, but, just start to add a little bit more activity in every day. So maybe like go for a walk at lunch and like build on it from there. So most of these are to do with kind of developing better lifestyle habits, which include reducing caffeine and, trying to sleep or regularize your sleep, and kind of making sure that you're also taking time outside of work to have a life outside of work, because one of the things that really contributes to this is just not having a life outside of work and just putting off other things and prioritizing work over everything else. So that brings us to this cognitive and emotional side. And again, things like focus, concentration, all of those things tend to get affected. And oftentimes, even though it might seem like you shouldn't be taking a break, it's a really good idea to just have at least 3 times during your workday when you just completely switch off for 5 minutes. So little things like this are going to help you as you contemplate preparing for change. And okay, so we've given you some resources in our toolkit on how you can actually prepare and counteract some of the risk factors that you have. So the first thing you need to understand is how stress is impacting you now. And so we've given you a way to do that and to kind of understand what your unique stress response is, because some people respond to stress with, just falling a bit sick. whereas other people start to get, very anxious, or they might have brain fog, or they might just feel really overwhelmed. So everyone responds to stress differently. We've also included some mindfulness-based activities. I know there's a lot of talk about mindfulness, so I just want to kind of explain to everyone that stress, when our body starts to feel it, we see it as a sort of a threat on us. And because our bodies haven't changed from the time that we were sort of hunter-gatherers, we have this fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. That causes a lot of biological changes. And mindfulness actually has been proven via neuroimaging to actually reduce some of those biological responses. So I know there's a lot of talk about mindfulness, but there are certain mindfulness activities that can reduce adrenal fatigue and can actually reduce the amount of cortisol that's in your body. And excess cortisol is what contributes to some of the symptoms of burnout. We also have a little bit of information about identifying strengths and planning how you can use strengths. And whilst this might seem very removed from burnout, one of the key symptoms of burnout is mental distance and cynicism or pessimism, both towards yourself and towards your life. And so there's two things that we're going to introduce you to in the toolkit, which are how to understand perfectionism in yourself, and also identifying and applying your strengths and converting them into skills. So we can move forward, Bhavna. Okay, so in terms of action, there are a lot of actions you can take to reduce burnout depending on what stage you're in. When you use our diagnostic tool, if you're coming up really high on that tool and it's looking like you're sort of in a stage 3/4, what you probably want to do is definitely try and reduce your stress level, but maybe think about working with someone like a mental health professional, like a counselor or a therapist, to just kind of teach you skills to help you manage stress. So therapy isn't just for people that are mentally ill, although it can help them. But one of the important things to remember here is that burnout, if it progresses to a certain level, it does increase the risk of you getting something like depression or anxiety disorder. In terms of what we've kind of defined for you as the action here is about psychological capital. So psychological capital sounds very kind of like a business term, or maybe it sounds like like an organizational term, but essentially what it is your capital in terms of psychological resources, so the positive mental strengths that you have. Because there are a lot of symptoms that come in as a result of imbalanced psychological capital or low psychological capital when you experience burnout. This activity that we've put in our toolkit will help you sort of build the 4 areas of psychological capital, which are resilience, optimism, hope, and self-efficacy or confidence. When we talk about hope and optimism here, they're slightly different from how we use them in everyday speech. So hope is really about setting achievable goals, setting paths to goals, kind of having more sense of where you want to go, because all of those things tend to reduce when burnout symptoms get to a certain point. So this section of our toolkit will help you build psychological capital, understand what it is and how you can leverage it so that you can perform better at work and in general be more resilient to stress. And being resilient to stress just means you are able to cope with it better. You can bounce back from uncertainty and risks in your life a bit better. And it is something that you can develop. So it's something that you can kind of strengthen over time. Okay, so moving to the 5th point, which is maintenance. So maintenance and relapse are kind of put together because we have kind of default behaviors that we will do. So if you're one of those people who is very focused on work, you're not going to change to someone who can prioritize your social life or other things easily without some practice. So relapsing into your old behaviors and having a couple of weeks where, you just have that much to do or too much to do is completely normal, but it's important to kind of recalibrate every now and then and make sure that you are not kind of setting yourself up for a physical or mental sort of breakdown or just becoming overwhelmed. It's just burnout, when that actually happens, it isn't irreversible. It's basically just that you're mentally exhausted, you're physically exhausted, and your body just can't go on, and you just need a complete break. So before we get to that point, it's good to have these like little checkpoints. And so the maintenance tool that we've provided to you in the toolkit is really about helping you kind of deal with situations in a more constructive way. So this could even be, for example, based on the kind of job that you have, it could be that the situation you're facing is that your work culture doesn't really allow you to take breaks or to be able to work even less hard than you are now. So if you're facing a problem like that, it doesn't mean that you can't sort of prevent burnout or that you can't reduce your stress. It's sometimes just about thinking about how you can relook at that situation and how you can use those psychological capital resources to sort of think through that situation. Oftentimes it's about kind of being a little bit better at how we share responsibilities at work that can really reduce your stress level. Sorry, Bhavna, you can move forward. Okay, so we can do as much as we can with self-care, but as I mentioned before, there are certain situations where professional help is really recommended. One of the reasons we recommend seeing a therapist at least once is because burnout symptoms can be very similar to the symptoms of depression. And, if you do have even subclinical, like mild depression, that can increase your risk of burnout. So it's important to have someone kind of speak to you who's a professional so that they can identify and make sure that you're not actually going into a point where you need more support. And similarly, if you have just gone through kind of a salient life experience, so that could be, a major change in your life, which could be emotional, or it could be, the loss of a family member. It could be something like divorce. It could just be, moving to a new country. All of those things are major life changes. Similarly, if you have physical illness that's been quite debilitating, that's also a major life change. As is, for example, becoming a parent for the first time. So it's always recommended that you go and see a mental health professional, just because your risk factors of maybe getting to this stage are higher. And yeah, there are certain things I would say that are red flags. One of them is depersonalization, which basically means that you feel a lot of mental distance to your life and you're not feeling as engaged in it as you should be. And it can feel a bit strange because you often just feel like you're just going through the motions, but you're not really engaging in things. And that can feel the same with even close family, where you're just like feeling so mentally exhausted that your brain is just kind of detached you from the situation. So that's one of the red flags. Similarly, if you're having severe issues of anxiety, so, if you're feeling so much dread about work that, you're actually, experiencing physical changes, or if you're having a panic attack, or you're just, all you want to do is just take 4 days off work, and that's all you can think about, your next holiday, and the next time you can take time off work. All of these things, rather than you being, not working hard or not being kind of ambitious enough, are actually signs that it might be time to take a little bit of a break. And we've outlined here 4 forms of intervention that a therapist might do with you. So there is CBT for stress, so that's cognitive behavioral therapy, and something called stress inoculation therapy, which both kind of help you with stress response and are quite structured therapies that help you with how you react to stress and cope with stress. The other one is meaning-based, compassion-based therapy and mindfulness-based stress reduction. So they kind of go together. And both of them are also therapy approaches that you might often see as part of a burnout therapy plan. And we also work with emotion-focused therapy, just because oftentimes people's relationships can be really strained with close family, partners, spouses, when they are facing burnout, because often people can become a little bit aggressive and really irritable, and it causes conflict potentially in their family environments. So emotion-focused therapy is about kind of regulating all of that. Okay, so I think we have a QR code and we will send this to you, but we have a diagnostic tool and a self-assessment tool that will help you understand where you might be on this spectrum. In terms of the honeymoon stage sounds really nice, but there are obviously things there too that you need to be aware of. And if you are in that stage, which is going to be the first one here, where you're just kind of approaching overload, meaning stress is increasing and you can feel it increasing, but you're still coping with it really well. That's maybe time to just make sure that you are achieving a good work-life balance and just spending enough time with people outside of work, just developing, understanding when things might not be going as well as they should be. So understanding if you are starting to feel like you're more tired than normal, or your sleep has gotten disrupted, or you just can't follow a healthy diet because you just can't, you just need to eat the junk food, or you just don't have time to even think about food, and so you just grab things. All of these things seem really small, but they can kind of over time cause these burnout symptoms to kind of start happening, and then you sort of don't even realize what's going on until you kind of reach the stage 2, 3 part where you're really quite run down already. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop there because I think we need some time for questions. But thank you so much for listening to our presentation. We really hope you can take advantage of the toolkit that we're going to share with you. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Yes, absolutely. Please drop in your questions if anybody has anything related to your work, or related to your burnout, or something that you are struggling with for a long time. If you have anything, please drop them in the chat box. Also, I've launched a poll. I would love to know how was the session for you, to like the session, or any feedback that you would want to give us. We just need to take. Yes, we do have a question. How do we identify in much earlier stage so that we can prevent ourselves from going to the next stage of burnout?
Yeah, great question. So we have provided you with a tool that can help you look at that. But I think, as I mentioned right in the beginning, one of the first things that happens is physical changes. And actually, this might be that you're just finding that you're getting colds all the time, or you've got allergies. Another thing is skin conditions, or like neck and shoulder pain. And they all seem really, really small, and you probably won't kind of even equate it to potentially being quite something like burnout. But if you're finding that you're getting ill a lot, or you're having allergies all the time, maybe just think about, are you working all of the time? Have you got enough time to sort of detach a little bit from work? Or are you, it doesn't have to be work related. You can get burnout even if you're not working at all. It could be that you're in a relationship which is either, not going very well, or even, where you're having conflicts with your partner at all. It could be even a non-partner relationship, family members that are putting a lot of pressure on you. to, I don't know, get a certain job or get married or whatever it is. Eventually those, if those are the sorts of things that usually happen in the early stages. So it's usually more physical symptoms, and it's usually around tiredness. But as I mentioned, we have got a tool for you that you can answer a couple of questions and figure out what stage you might be in. I hope that was helpful. Okay, I think someone had asked about how can you help a partner? And that's a really good question too. We have given you guys some tools which are in the toolkit, which you can download. But I think it would be good to get them aware of how they might be impacted by stress. So if it is someone who is working in a really high stress job and is kind of just so exhausted at the end of the day that they can't do anything but crawl into bed, and they can just kind of sit in front of Netflix, and they're just not able to do anything else but work, it's probably good to get them to maybe do some of those exercises about recognizing the different ways in which we experience stress, just to kind of get an idea of how it's affecting them. And then you can, of course, start with some of the lifestyle changes, maybe just kind of developing kind of more time outside, even things like, you don't have to go to the gym, even just things like going for a walk every Sunday to somewhere green can make a massive difference to your stress level, as can, making small changes in your diet, reducing alcohol and caffeine. I mean, I love caffeine. I'm the biggest coffee drinker, but I know also that it can have kind of a negative response because it tends to create a lot of kind of chemical changes. So we're really, really alert, and then we tend to have a bit of a kind of dive off of caffeine, and then we drink more caffeine. So those sorts of things can really help, but definitely we have some tools that you can share with your partner and maybe do those things together.
Yes, let me ask you the next question. Also, once you overcome a certain burnout, is it possible to re-experience?
Yeah, so it absolutely is possible. Although if you work on those exercises and kind of build into your life and just make it part of your everyday life, where you're even, if you don't have time to spend an hour at the gym, that's totally fine. But even if you're spending 5 minutes on a mindfulness activity, even if you're finding things to do that maybe you like, which are a little bit more creative, just making sure that you have some time for yourself that's outside of like your work environment is really important. But you can experience it again. But if you work on how your sort of resilience and mental strength, it does make you, I would say, able to cope with stress a little bit better. But it's very possible, like a lot of experience during COVID, that you're doing quite well, and then you just have something in your life that is very stressful, and those things we can't predict. So you can go back into it, but awareness is always the best, because it is something that that is easier to reverse the earlier you catch it, basically. I hope that was helpful too.
Is it possible that we can share the toolkit? I'll definitely share the toolkit post the session on your mail, so you can you can visit it later. But if there is a link, please share it in the chat. Also, I'll take up the next question. How do we make the employer realize burnout situations? I think that's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it's one of the things that companies are beginning to pay more attention to. But I do also appreciate that there are a lot of companies that don't think about this at all. And so I think that you do need to kind of review your work culture and just think about, okay, where is it that maybe I can share this work with other members of my team? am I the person that always wants to take more work on because I'm like, no, it's fine, I can do it, rather than able to set those boundaries and be like, nope, I've got all of this other stuff to do, you're going to have to take this on. I think also communicating, so communicating within your work teams, communicating with your managers, kind of setting realistic expectations for yourself as well, which is actually one of the hardest things for us to do. You know, we should realize that it's great to be ambitious and it's great to work really hard, but that doesn't mean that you wake up in the morning and look at your email, and you look at your email right before you sleep and you have to be working 24/7. Just, you know, try and kind of have that, you know, that shift from your work to outside work, and also think about whether you are taking on more things in an effort to be really productive all the time, because eventually you're gonna meet a point of diminishing returns, and you're gonna start to find your physical health is deteriorating, and all the burnout symptoms are gonna start, because no one can kind of consistently work like that for long. So yeah, so I think that with employers, it's they are changing, but I think it's also about how you work and how you approach work.
Okay. Okay. Should one do more than expected to get more exposure? Should one mind their own business to avoid burnout? This is the best practice.
Sorry, can you repeat that question? I didn't entirely understand.
Yes. So should one do more work than expected to get more exposure? Or should one mind their own business to avoid burnout, or like do minimal tasks, one that is their student?
So I don't think that we're necessarily advocating that you guys don't work towards, you know, don't kind of perform properly at work. I think that it's all about balance, right? So there are ways to work where you can, you know, still keep yourself healthy and attain, you know, promotions and get that exposure. What we're basically saying, and one of the ways you want to try and prevent burnout, is by not literally being, you know, it shouldn't be an all or nothing situation. It shouldn't be like, I have to work 15 hours a day for the next 10 years, because your working life is like 50 years, right? So if you've just been working for 2 years and you're working 15 hours a day or 16 hours a day, and that's entirely consuming you, it isn't going to be sustainable, and you're going to start to you know, have all of these symptoms come in. So what's probably better is to be like, I'm going to learn to work, you know, in a smarter way. I'm going to achieve those goals, but I'm going to have, you know, I'm going to be realistic about how I'm going to achieve them. So I don't think it's about kind of doing one or the other. Obviously, if you want to get promoted at work, you want your employers to think that you're working hard and meeting, you know, the deadlines you need to meet. But a lot of the time you can do that without necessarily working 15 hours a day. A lot of the time you can you also want to be able to sustain that momentum for a longer time. So it's kind of about getting balance. I hope that made sense, though. Did you want to ask anything further as a follow-up to that question?
Also, just to add to what Annu mentioned on this point, it's okay to have like 10 tasks at hand if you can align them properly. Because normally what happens is we get very overwhelmed that we have 10 tasks at hand and we keep shuffling between these different tasks and don't actually get anything completed properly, and then the guilt of not completing things properly consumes us. This is another very solid reason for it going through the burnout. So if you can align your tasks properly, if you can prioritize your tasks, it is way easier to get the work done and increment your learning experience. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Oh, thank you very much for, I think Amit just sent a message. Yeah, and the other thing, I just want to add one more point to this, is about communication. You know, I'm sure you guys work in environments where you're part of a team. And oftentimes, you know, when people ask us to support them, we'll say yes, because we want to be nice and we like that person. And I think aligning these tasks, as Bhavna mentioned, is also about communicating with other people in your organization and just kind of saying, I have a lot on my plate right now. I can't help you with this, or I can only take half of this on, and just kind of being a bit better about communicating and not seeing yourself like as the only person that can do this right. Because I think that's something else which really is a risk factor, is those perfectionists out there that are just like, I have to do this because no one else on my team is going to be able to do it. Like, I've got to do it. And that's a really, you know, it is positive, but at the same time, it can get to a point where you're not actually using the resources available to you, you know, who are like your other colleagues and the people around you, because you're like really convinced that only you can do it in the perfect way. So that's something else that we see a lot in burnout.
Right. Thank you so much, Anu and Bhavna. We are almost at the session. I think we could just have any more questions, but thank you so much for a wonderful, insightful session. I hope many people have actually loved the session and actually have the takeaways that they can go away with. But again, thank you everyone for joining this. I just wanted to remind about the gym subscription option that we have. You can just save the link that I've shared in the chat. And you can, if you don't want to do it right now, you can do it later also. So please save the link for a future use. Again, thank you, Annu. Thank you, Bhavna, for doing this for us. And thank you, everyone who have joined. Have a great weekend.
Thanks so much, everyone. And thank you, Aisha, for inviting us.
Thank you so much. Bye, guys. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.